Welcome to Gorillapreneur, the art of waging small business warfare podcast, teaching Davids how to defeat Goliaths. Now here's your host, Mark Anthony Peterson.
Welcome back to the podcast for entrepreneurs, startups, and business mavericks. If you're not a maverick, you don't have to go home, but you got to get up out of this podcast. In this podcast, we teach entrepreneurs how to defeat the corporate giant. Just like in the story of David and Goliath, David defeated a much taller and stronger Goliath, not by fighting the giant in hand-to-hand combat, but by using technology, a slingshot. The slingshot allowed the smaller David to attack from a distance that minimized the advantages that Goliath had over the smaller David. My name is Mark Anthony Peterson. I'm a serial entrepreneur, a futurist, and the managing executive at Serial Consulting, a small business strategy and technology consulting firm. I am also the author of the book Gorillapreneur, Small Business Strategy for Davids Wanting to Defeat Goliaths, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes. This podcast is brought to you by Serial Consulting. An idea can launch a business, a strategy can take it global. Guys, please support the show. And here's how you can do it. Like the show, subscribe to the show, and leave a comment for the show. Guys, do it in iTunes, the Apple Podcast app, Podomatic, Speaker, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. But just do it. And please check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/gorillapreneur. Help us bring a Fab Lab to the Black Belt South. And we're going to take some of the money and make this a better podcast as well. Any support is welcomed. We have a fantastic show for you today because we have a real live gorillapreneur that's taking on the entire music industry. I'm talking about Robert Hatcher, the founder and CEO of SoundCollide. Yeah, SoundCollide. These guys have built a virtual studio that makes it easy for you to find music artists close and abroad that fits the next song or your next project. You don't have to waste time traveling, waiting on emails. You can record via their platform. They're like the Skype of the music industry, letting artists collaborate online and produce new tracks and projects at a fraction of the cost that it takes to do it now in a studio. Yeah, these guys are going to disrupt. So please enjoy my interview with Robert Hatcher, founder of SoundCollide. I am really excited for today's podcast because I just found out this young man is from my hometown, Selma, Alabama. Yes, the great Selma, Alabama, the historic Selma, Alabama, that changed the course of world's history because of that march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And guys, I think this young man is going to change the history of music.
Thank you.
Yes. We are going to be talking about Robert's company, SoundCollide, today on the podcast. And I think you're going to totally enjoy everything we have to say because he has some disruptive technology that's going to change how music is made. Robert, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and just introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay. My name is Robert Hatcher. A little bit about my background, as you mentioned. I'm from Selma. I also grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Excuse me. Give you a quick rundown in terms of where I started to kind of how I got here. Coming out of high school, I was a really good basketball player. Ended up getting scholarship or ended up playing junior college basketball. Then I tore my knee. Then I started to think about, what I'm going to do without basketball.
Right.
Was very, very passionate about psychology and business. Those were my two passions, and those were two fields of study that kind of seemed extremely intuitive to me. So when I started getting in school, I knew that I kind of wanted to go in one of those directions. I ended up telling myself I was going to get my PhD in industrial organizational psychology. For those who don't know, it's just a long word for like the psychology of teams, more specifically. It really reminded me of kind of like the psychology of a point guard. Just like when you're on the court, you have different people, different teams. How do they fit together? How do you recognize certain strengths? That's what's called like a mental model, in terms of you have this collection of people. How do you get them to think in a cohesive way to be productive for a specific outcome? But it's more so in a business setting instead of on the court. So that was kind of my life plan at the time when maybe my sophomore year in college. Then I took a entrepreneurship class, which I thought was going to be more so of like a small business, like how to register a company, because I saw that a lot of IO psychologists said that they wish they would took a business class so they could learn how to manage their own firm or their own consulting company. So I was thinking that I'm going to try to get ahead of the ball. So when I took that class, it was more geared towards the lean startup methodology and the Steve Blank and the Eric Ries. And, it was very fascinating for me because it was along the lines of kind of like a cognitive experiment. Mm-hmm. You have this assumption that you treat as a null hypothesis. Then you try to disprove that assumption. And I thought that was really, really fascinating to take some of the things that I've learned from a psychology and experiment standpoint and then apply that to try to generate value for a business. So that class started out as a project. And basically that's kind of where I started the company in that project, and through different iterations, we kind of discovered and stumbled across what we believe is very valuable today.
So how long ago was that you took that class?
Fall 2015.
Okay, so you hadn't been an entrepreneur that long.
Right.
So 3.5, 4 years
Yep.
from that class, and launched your business in that class.
Yep.
So tell us about your business, SoundCollide. Mm-hmm. How much progress have you made? And give us the history and kind of the feature function, as much of it as you can share.
Yeah, so and I'll kind of start with the history, picking up from that class. Originally, SoundCollide was supposed to be a Facebook for music artists. Our original hypothesis was that artists were struggling to connect with each other and they wanted to discover each other more efficiently. So, and kind of to give you my bias towards that, originally, again, from Alabama, my brother's a producer. We used to write songs, produce, and we would travel to Atlanta like maybe once a month, participate in beat battles, different competitions, networking events. Because there were so many people that were traveling to Atlanta to do the exact same thing. So we was like, man, there's so many people here and that's traveling here. How do we stay connected? Turns out that finding people wasn't the issue, much more as it was staying connected. I think when we did our original research, we saw that artists, they discover each other frequently, but they lose about maybe 70% of their contacts over like the next 6 months. So we kind of saw that wasn't an issue too much, and we didn't necessarily have the solution for that. So at the same time, I'm going through this, I'm taking a behavior modification class because I'm still a psych major. And one thing that was very interesting to me about that class, the ABCs of behavior modification, is antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So you look at a behavior, whether it's a desired or undesired behavior, and then you try to see what is prompting that, and then what is the consequences of that action. So taking that methodology and looking at the research that we were doing and piggybacking off of that, we saw that a huge issue, or a lot of time was spent, a lot of effort, actual activity was spent. Artists, it was almost a logistics process for artists to connect with each other. They're either, like we were, traveling 2 hours to another city, or traveling 40 minutes to another city, or you're seeing this chain of like 10 to 17 emails over a period of like 4 months. So we saw all this activity, all this behavior, all this action to accomplish a goal that we saw was a bottleneck. So then we said, okay, what if we built kind of like an Xbox Live for recording music. My friend plays video games. It's like, if he's in another state, we could just pick up the game and play. It's like, why can't we do the same thing for music? So we pivoted towards building this recording application online that allows artists to record in different locations in real time. And before we even had a product, one of my teachers and mentors, he ran the music program at Georgia State. He had a connection to the director of the A3C, which is a huge music festival and conference here in Atlanta. So he was able to get us in as the showcase for the tech sector. So we went and basically we kind of jerry-rigged some stuff up where I had a friend, my same brother, he's in a different location, but I allowed him to remote desktop into my computer. So what happened was when artists would come by our booth and they would pick up the headphones, they would start recording with him, and they thought it was a live product, thinking that like, oh, you can really record with people, not knowing that he just has control of my computer and he can listen in and interact with them. So, but going through that experience, I mean, I think we was just like saying we would take donations, and I think like in 3 hours, we had like $3,000, and I want to say I think the best part of that was like the last $1,000 came like after we left. So it was just like a proven, word of mouth. People were really excited. People started telling us their stories, their journeys, how it can make an impact. And that really started me focusing on that problem.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you can't get better testimonials than that, than people putting dollars on the table
100%.
Right in front of you after they've tested a concept that you just pulled together, not the final product, but you're not even a beta, but a concept that mimics some of what you ultimately want to build.
Yep, and again, this is, and to put it even more perspective, these are underground artists. So these are people who've already, and A3C is a pretty big deal. So these are people who've already traveled from another city, already spent $200 on the conference package, which is something separate than the actual music festival. And it's like, these aren't the most, they don't have like the most money to spare. And to still put that down, and it was a lot of like agents and A&Rs who was telling me, like, I managed 4 or 5 artists that's somewhere between Florida and South Carolina. So, it was talking about the cost of flights, how we could kind of eliminate some of that. It makes that process a lot easier for them.
Absolutely. I could see how this is extremely valuable for underground artists and major artists, because you're right. The logistics of trying to get artists in the same place to manage the creative process so that they can produce a product, comes with a lot of cost. And if you can eliminate that and make it seamless so that the end result is as if they were in the same studio, you've got something that's going to disrupt the market. So tell us now. Keep going. Fast forward.
Okay.
You have this concept that you rig up. You raise $3,000, and I'm not minimum. $3,000 is a lot for someone just launching a business.
Absolutely.
It took me a long time after my last startup to get to $3,000.
Absolutely.
So what next? What happens next?
Then it comes the hard part. Man, the next, I want to say probably the next 3 years, probably 3.5 or maybe 2.5 years. It was just a lot of, so at that time, I'm really excited. I'm kind of over the moon. I'm like, we got the next big thing. And then I would go on to do a couple of pitch competitions, university-related pitch competitions, and I would go on and win, boosting my confidence. And I'm just, over the moon, right? So now I just have to build it. So I quickly realized the cycle of software development and how ignorant I was to that. So I want to say after that happened, that semester, I probably ended up winning another like $2,000. So I want to say going into that summer, I had like $5,000. And I just try to use that money to pay somebody to help me build the application. Long story short, I want to say the first 2 or 3 months, at first I thought I could get somebody to just, take it on as a passion project, maybe some young developers who wants to develop their skills. And that definitely didn't work out. It was too many lines of communication. Probably had 4 people working on it. They're all new. I didn't have the level of expertise to guide them. They didn't have the level of expertise to guide themselves. And then it was just a lot of, one person is working in one program language, the other person is working in another. So it was just a lot of miscommunication. So that was like 2 to 3 months wasted. Then I tried to pay somebody, let's say, I think this is maybe in the fall. Oh my goodness. So there's, for those who are aware of like in project management and, there's a concept called waterfall, which is like, okay, this is the plan. And then it's like you write all the requirements out and then you think that you have all the steps done. So this took like 6 months, right? I paid these guys, I think maybe $6,000. Long story short, 6 months later, it's the wrong product. And what happened in that process, it was me, it was a gentleman who was kind of like the marketing or the business relationship person for this development firm. And they're young guys, starting up just like me. And then there was the developer. So I never really had a chance to speak to the developer much. I was speaking more to the marketing guy. And, we was talking about the requirements. So, he would send me like updates and saying like, okay, we're doing X, Y, and Z. So when it came to the final presentation, there was all this miscommunication. It was like, oh, I did this. I thought you wanted this. And I said, no, I never said that. And there was a lot of spaghetti code, meaning that it wasn't efficient. There was a lot of issues. Some of the key features weren't there. And, it was just like, man, another 6 months, $5,000 wasted. So I think after that, I was able to do a few more pitch competitions. And the whole time I'm going through this process, I'm still basically doing business development. I'm still kind of like over the moon. People are starting to show a lot of demand. So like from that initial A3C event, I met some people, met some A&Rs, introduced me to some people. Now I'm getting meetings with some pretty big companies, some pretty big mid-sized organizations. So I'm developing this Rolodex of people who have this demand, and it's like, yo, we're waiting. So it's like, and every time I think I'm getting close, I'm really taking 2 steps behind. So long story short, I would say probably in the last year, we were able to get into the accelerated program here at Comcast, which helped a lot. And really outside of the investment, their expertise to point me to the right developers, to help me finish building an MVP, that was probably the most important. Because before that time, I didn't have any expertise. I had people that I wanted to bring on as technical advisors at the time didn't have the adequate skill set to perform the job. Then I had a friend of mine who's like a data science wizard, full stack developer wizard. He came back he was working in Arizona. He moved back to Atlanta, and we've kind of reconnected. And he's kind of been like my advisor, and it's kind of been helping me fill that role. So I'd say like we finally got an MVP out, and now we're starting to test. But also the bottleneck is still the development side of it. So what I did at the beginning of the summer is that I went through a boot camp and started teaching myself how to code. And so that way I could kind of eliminate that bottleneck. And in terms of kind of the relationships that I had to put them kind of on ice for a little bit, just to make sure like, okay, we know that there's demand out there. Let us get our ducks in a row where we can actually have a product to come back to them and say, hey, are you still interested in doing this paid pilot with us? We can still save you, X amount of dollars in X amount of time. So that's kind of like where we are now, where we're still tweaking the product a little bit, and we're still doing some quality testing.
So now that you have a minimum viable product, an MVP, what would you say is true about your company that nobody believes would generate revenue?
I think over the past 2 years, when we've talked to investors and people who were interested, their question was, how much revenue can you generate? will you make enough revenue that this is actually investable? So that's the big question mark that was hanging over our heads in terms of, is this really a huge startup company, or is this just like a lifestyle business? And I would say that a lot of that kind of comes from, we're talking to people who aren't in the music industry. So especially definitely from the investors that we talk to in the Southeast, a lot of people that, their strong suits is cybersecurity, healthcare. We see a lot more flexibility in Austin and when we get to the West Coast. But I think that's the big question mark for us. I think, so now I'm also still in school. I'm getting my master's, my MBA with a concentration in analytics consulting. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to actually use data from the recording sessions to create publishing agreements. What a lot of people don't know is that there's $2.5 billion that goes missing every year from independent artists because they create this music and they upload it, but they don't have any proper paperwork behind it. So you put something on YouTube and it starts generating ad revenue, and you're looking for your cut. YouTube simply just says, well, we don't know who to pay. There's no registration. There's no publishing agreement. And the difficult part is you can't really go back and verify your contributions. So there's things that we've been doing to make it easier for artists to make sure that they always get the credit for the songs that they create. But also going back to the recording part, we've seen a lot of interest outside of the actual artists, but recording studios, small labels. I think there's a huge play for us. For example, 7 states control 66% of the audio production revenue in the United States. And you think about it, kind of makes sense. It's the cities specific in those states is like LA, Atlanta, Nashville, I want to say Miami, New York, and Chicago. And when you think of those regions you think, specialize in a specific sound. New York, you kind of have everything from pop, rock. Same thing with LA in terms of hip hop, pop, rock. Nashville, country music capital. Atlanta, hip hop capital. And if you're in Wisconsin and you want to create, a country record, right, or if you want to create a hip hop record, I'm pretty sure there's good engineers in Wisconsin, but the best are going to be in Nashville. So how do you get in contact with the engineer on that side? And from a recording studio standpoint, when we was talking to them, basically, their business model is, it's a real estate issue, right? They only have so many rooms, so many people in capacity, and then there's a time limit. When we were talking with them, they were excited because, this opens up a new revenue stream for them to start working with artists who don't have to travel so far just to get to their studio. I think there's a huge play in terms of getting into recording studios and working with a lot of independent labels where they can reach out and expand their resources and their customer base.
Wow. I like that. I mean, that is a lot of different opportunities. Right. Like you said, the ability to manage the ownership of a sound or a beat and helping them to monetize that. Right. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you can twist that to make money off that. Right. And likewise with opening up more capacity. That concept of, that virtual interaction plays well in non-music, right? And you found a way to make it work in music. Right. So yeah, this is exciting stuff. So tell me about a business trend in your segment that excites you the most. What's the one trend in the music industry that you look at and go, if it keeps going that way, I'm going to be a billionaire?
Definitely. The trend of it's 2 trends that are happening at the same time that are parallel to each other. One is the business model and the adjustment of the label. And that is affecting the increase in artists becoming independent. If the more artists become independent, the more money I'm going to make. simply because artists are basically doing everything on them for themselves, right? We just are now kind of creating a more efficient logistics process for them to move their talent and their music. But since streaming, I want to say, hit in 2010, before it was the labels controlled the distribution. The labels would pay for, the CDs and all the upfront costs to create the music. But then when streaming hit, that cost went out the window. So now artists can just upload their music. Then with the internet and social media, before, there was a term called payola, where basically the record labels would pay the radio stations to play whoever, they're trying to push to the forefront. So they had a control on the radio stations. Now with social media, artists are being discovered before the record label can even pay somebody and manufacture, an artist, so to speak. So you have the internet and you have streaming, which really stripped a lot of power from the record label and made it much more easier for the artist to be discovered. Nowadays, it's almost like, be honest with you, it's really like the record labels are just almost like an investor, and these artists are just like startups. They're not even grooming artists anymore. They're just waiting to see who has traction and who can go viral, and then once we see that, we'll put a formula behind that person, and then just make money off of their publishing. But with there's been a huge, maybe for the past 5 years, there's been a huge push and more knowledge about owning your own music, about being able to do it yourself. And if you do get into an agreement, understanding the different types of distribution agreements where you can still own the majority of your music. So that's been, I think, global revenue for independent artists in 2016 grew by like 80% over the past 3 years prior. So with that trend, keep growing, it's like, okay, if artists are looking to do it for themselves, that means more customers have more money to spend on my platform.
Wow. So these trends are basically disaggregating
Absolutely.
The music industry. Music industry initially had economies of scale.
Yes.
And so that was the only way a person could get to be a big artist.
Yep.
But now...
Yep.
And it's disaggregated, and you are going to make it easier.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
For them to become a viable music startup.
Absolutely.
Right? By collaborating with other talented people.
Yep.
If you reduce that cost,
yep.
now the startups are going to come out of everywhere and produce quality music.
Absolutely.
And you're going to be a billionaire because of it.
I hope so.
There you go. So tell me now, what has been the hardest aspect of launching a business in the music industry?
I would say it probably hasn't. It's probably easier to do it in the music industry, to be honest with you, because the music industry is such a relationship-based type of industry. It's like I went to an event last week. You hear stories all the time of a gentleman who was just like, working for free at the studio and, got put on, with quality control music and, all these big names. It's like one of the few industries where you don't need any qualifications like a PhD or a high school diploma, and there's opportunity for you to make millions of dollars. And then, it feeds so many families. The only thing you have to do is just kind of work at the craft. So it's very relationship based. I would say the most difficult part, it just comes from running the business. And I would say for me, it's definitely been kind of almost like a management side in terms of the first 2 or 3 years, just a level of ignorance in terms of not knowing the software development cycle, not being able to manage my resources in terms of understanding, okay, how many people I need to work on the front end, back end, with their skill set. How do I estimate how many days? That was probably the most difficult part at the beginning. Like I said, I was just so excited. I was just willing to pay anybody. And it was telling me there was a developer. I'm thinking all developers are the same. I didn't know front end, back end. I didn't know anything about AWS and servers and all this all this methodology and architecture that you need to think about in terms of even from scaling and it's so much. So that was definitely kind of the most difficult part. Me just kind of taking my lumps those first 2-3 years.
That's a good segue into getting more advice from you that you could share with entrepreneurs, what's the one habit that makes you productive as an entrepreneur?
I would say the one habit that makes me productive as an entrepreneur is probably my time management skills. I think I've been able to accomplish a lot because I plan 6 months in advance, and I understand when I have gaps. So what I mean by gaps, so I said like earlier in the summer, I started learning software development for myself. I knew that I had about a month and a half, almost 2 months, where I didn't have any priorities. So I gave myself, I was working like 72 hours a week during that time so I could develop that skill set, because then in the summer I had summer classes, which I had to scale back. And then now I'm also in that same gap, which I'm working to kind of finish that software development skill set. And the reason why I say that is because I have a business that I'm still managing, and then I still have school. The great part about school and where I'm at in my concentration is I get to choose my classes. So all my classes have something to do with the actual business itself. So I'm still kind of working both at the same time. It has allowed me to accomplish my goals a lot quicker. Kind of follow a lean methodology in terms of, even though I plan, I have objectives for the next 6 months, but I plan for like the next 2 weeks. What am I going to accomplish in these 2 weeks? And then I kind of mark my progress, and then I was able to see, okay, I understand my workload. Meaning, I think before, and then again, this is just like the most valuable thing that I've learned. Before, I would just have these ideas and goals and objectives and like, okay, I want to accomplish this without really understanding my capacity. Now I understand how much I can accomplish in 2 weeks, and then I only plan for that type of load. So in 2 weeks, I know like, okay, I'm consistently accomplishing my goals, and like, no, I'm not going to put too much on myself. Because I think before, I just had so much that I wanted to accomplish that I was just incrementally doing all these different things, but I wasn't accomplishing my end goal. So that's the time management part for me has been the most important thing and advice that I could give to somebody.
What platform or software do you rely on the most with the launch of your business?
Well, from the coding side, I use we use React, kind of a MERN stack, and I use VS Code to code it. I use Jira from a project management standpoint. That helps a lot. Those are probably the two platforms and software that I use the most.
If you had to start over and relaunch SoundCollide, what would you do differently?
That's a good question. Knowing what I know now?
Knowing exactly what you know now.
Knowing what I know now, I think I would have been a little bit more detailed in my planning in terms of creating a project charter, trying to understand how many people I need to build X, Y, and Z, how long that would take, what is the cost of that, how much do I need in terms of a cash reserve for when things go wrong. I would have spent a lot more time detailing the process and in detailing the cost, and then prioritizing that list to see, okay, what do I need to do at step 1, step 2, and step 3. I think that's something that I would have done different versus just being exciting and just trying to get stuff done. So
can users now interact with the platform now that you have an MVP? If so, how do they get in contact with you? How do they learn more about what you're doing?
Yes. So right now we're doing kind of an alpha testing. We would love for anybody who wants to get involved. Only thing you have to do is go to soundcollide.com and sign up. And we'll reach back out to you and schedule a time to have you kind of try and work with the platform.
That's excellent. Robert, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Man. This has been a great conversation. We've learned a lot about your business and how you're going to disrupt the music industry, and looking forward to seeing you on the cover of a lot of music magazines, but more importantly, the one called Forbes is the one that we want to see you on. Guys, get over to soundcollide.com and sign up if you are an artist listening to this podcast. I know I have a ton of you in the audience that have contributed music to the podcast and that listen to the podcast. This is the guy you need to know. So get to soundcollide.com.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I told you this was going to be a great podcast, and thank you, Robert Hatcher, for being on the podcast and helping us understand how Sound Collide is going to disrupt the music industry. Guys, like what you hear on the Gorillapreneur podcast? Then subscribe, like, and comment, and get over to patreon.com/Gorillapreneur and support the podcast. You really like what you hear and you want more? Check out my other podcasts. Career Coaching X's and O's. That's where you're going to get career advice for executives seeking the corner office. Some of you don't want to be entrepreneurs and want that corner office. Career Coaching X's and O's is for you. And for those of you who can't get enough of the gig economy, check out my podcast, Gigging, Everything and the Sharing Economy. That's news and predictions about the sharing economy and some great interviews with those who are disrupting the sharing economy. Find all of those podcasts on Speaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, and any of your favorite podcast listening platforms. I'll put links in the show notes so that you can get to not only Gorillapreneur, but all those other great podcasts that I mentioned. Gorillapreneurs. Scott Sullivan said it best in episode 7. Be a mace, sharpen those spikes, and remember, if you're not breaking something, your company might be the next thing that gets broken.
Thank you for listening to the Gorillapreneur, the Art of Waging Small Business Warfare podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you may also enjoy the book Gorillapreneur, Small Business Strategy for Davids Wanting to Defeat Goliaths, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes. Follow Mark Peterson on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Gorillapreneur. Now I want to close with a quote from the great Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu. Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first, then seek to win. Keep fighting, Gorillapreneurs.